This recording is about a model of Christian charity by Jonathan Winthrop and Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards. Just to review some of the things I said a couple of weeks ago about Puritanism, remember that Puritans and Pilgrims believed in the total depravity of the individual. They believed that certain people were elected or saved and there was nothing you could do about that. There was limited atonement. Number 4, they believed in irresistible grace. God's grace was freely given. It could not be earned or denied. And finally, they believed in the perseverance of the saints. Those elected had the full power to interpret the will of God. We have 2 sermons, and interestingly, one of them is by a person who is not a preacher. Jonathan Winthrop actually was a lawyer, and he became the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The sermon was delivered aboard the Arabella in 1630. He was a Puritan, but he wanted to purify the church from within, not separate. And remember, that's the difference between the Pilgrim and the Puritan. The Puritan wanted to purify, the Pilgrim wanted to separate, but they both believed in Puritan doctrine. There were 3 main settlements: Jamestown 1607, Plymouth 1620, and Massachusetts Bay Colony 1629. You might wonder why we are not discussing Jamestown since it is just down the road from us. Jamestown was an economic settlement, not religious, and the religious settlements had the most profound effect on us as a nation and our literature. A model of Christian charity sets forth the guidelines for how the settlers should help and treat one another once they were settled. He notes that there is a division among them. Some must be rich, some poor, some high and eminent in power and dignity, others mean and in submission. You might wonder and think about, is there any difference between the society in which we live now? The focus in the sermon is love, help, charity, and forgiveness. I do not have to restate here how he develops his argument on how each should be treated. You have explained this beautifully in your responses on the details that Winthrop gives. I like to do a word search when I'm reading literary works, and you can do that easily by hitting Control F on the keyboard, and that will open up a little window, and you can see what word is repeated most often in a selection. I did this for this particular sermon, and I entered the word love, and that word appears 75 times, which I think is interesting. There can be no doubt that is one of the most significant themes of the work. Christ is mentioned 32 times. God is mentioned 27 times. By contrast to Edwards, who is coming up, hell is never mentioned in Winthrop's sermon, nor is pit, nor is angry. Winthrop's sermon emphasizes the grace that Puritans held dear. If you are familiar with the Christian Bible, the sermon is rooted in the New Testament. By contrast, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards was delivered in 1741. By contrast, Jonathan Edwards is delivering his sermon over 100 years later. Puritanism is on the decline. Many settlers have died, and they have been replaced by new generations. There are now a number of religious sects, not just Puritanism. There's Quakerism, Baptist. Edwards is attempting to revitalize Puritanism in what has come to be called the Great Awakening. The tone between Winthrop and Edwards could not be more different. One is based on love and charity. The other is based on fear and anger. I did a word search on this sermon as well. Angry is mentioned 21 times. Hell is mentioned 52 times. Pit is mentioned 18 times. Christ is mentioned 15 times. Love is mentioned 8 times. God is mentioned 135 times. I cannot think of another way that best exemplifies the Puritan belief in total depravity than this sermon. I certainly get that impression from Edwards here. I'm not keeping score, but accounting for the words used indicates repetition and unity and themes. Also, I could argue that Edwards takes a more Old Testament approach in his sermon. You as a reader, however, have to decide which approach you find most appealing. About your responses. Your responses to the prompts were excellent, extremely insightful. Make sure that you always have an introduction, body, and a conclusion. The introduction provides background and restates the prompt. The body offers evidence or proof, and the conclusion brings everything together. Just about everybody in the class is doing that. There are a couple of essays that don't have clear introductions. It's difficult to determine where the body begins, and it's difficult to tell where the conclusion begins. In response to peers, make sure you bring something new to the question. Saying that you agree does not show much critical thinking. You might think about how you can disagree. You might think about challenging what people are saying. One thing that you might ask about Winthrop is, does he give a realistic view of working together? People like competition. They're not always charitable. The ego gets involved. If someone does not pull his or her weight, others feel taken advantage of. On the other hand, Edwards is preaching fire and brimstone. Is that a convincing way to bring people to God and religion? Do you want to be compared to a spider hanging over the pit of hell, or to a worm, or be told that you are standing on a slippery slope ready to fall? These are some thoughts about the readers that we've just been discussing. Next up is Anne Bradstreet. We have a poetic view of Puritanism, and a helpful hint is, how does her poetry bring in God? Since Puritanism, the focus is God, that's what I'd like you to focus on with Anne Bradstreet. After the Puritans, we begin to turn to the 18th century, where we have exactly the opposite. The focus is on reason and the rational. Good luck.